Turn up, let's go.
All right, welcome, Leadership Nation. We are on a journey to bring together men and women who believe in taking ownership and responsibility in their life when it comes to finances, family and friends, and fitness. And this is the Leadership to Wealth podcast, and I'm your host, Neil D'Souza. Now, my guest today is a husband and father that has helped many people when it comes to relationship counseling for more than 2 decades. Now, he branched out to encompass more as a management consultant, and he's really known for his work with issues around conflict. Now, I want to welcome to the show today, Mr. Andrew Lewis. Hello, Andrew. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Neil. Thanks for having me. And I just want to congratulate you on your podcast. I think it's really inspiring to see what you're doing with this.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. You know, we're in very interesting times, unprecedented times. And, you know, in the middle of a global pandemic, with all that has been going on, it really impressed upon me the need for someone and for people to speak up and speak into what's going on, because there's a lot of fear mongering and there's just a lot of people that are scared and don't know what to do. And in those times, I really believe that someone needs to speak up. And so we started the podcast, and I know that's nothing new for you. I mean, after all, for you, you're dealing in issues of conflict.
Yeah, I appreciate you, pointing out that we need people to speak up. I think we rely so much
Mm.
on media sort of being filtered through the mainstream.
Hmm.
And I don't know that it's always gonna give us exactly what we need. I mean, it has a
Right.
role, it plays a place, but
Yeah.
what you're doing here with this sort of story directly to the people, I think is truly inspiring, especially when there can be fear around. So
Yeah,
good to be here.
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Well, what we normally like to do to get started is we have some rapid fire questions just as a warm up, and directed at you. You know, whatever comes to the top of your mind, choose an answer or yes or no, and just get us warmed up before we get into the full interview. You ready for that?
Okay, all right, all right. So
Uh,
you've done this with your guests before,
I've done this with my guests, and
and they don't have any Freudian slips or anything like that.
we've had some interesting responses, and to be honest, the questions have actually been changing as we've moved along.
Okay, good,
As
good.
I get to, because one of the interesting things that I'm working on is getting to know thought processes and some of the things behind the leaders in our societies. And
Gotcha,
I
gotcha.
know the questions will get better as we go, but some of it's just meant to be fun. So here
Awesome,
we go.
awesome. I'm always down for fun.
All right. So I make I, Andrew Lewis, make friends easily.
No, not at all. And friends are, I mean, in the traditional sense of the term, yeah,
Right.
friends is easy. Acquaintances, networking,
Right.
friends. I think if you find a few in your lifetime,
Mm.
you're considered pretty fortunate.
Wow, he's getting deep real quick. I have a vivid imagination.
I do. I do. Imagination's, is your ability to travel, right? So
Mm.
sometimes I use my imagination to go places that
Mm.
I can't go due to the prison of my life, right? So yeah, imagination is vivid, and
Right.
use it to be creative.
That's great. I worry about things.
Yeah, I really, I've been working on that. I'm not there yet, but unfortunately, still, yes.
Yeah.
I worry, and you can define worry any way you want it, but
Right.
no, I do. I do
Right.
worry. I worry for society. I worry for
Mm.
my family at times, and but it keeps me creative, keeps me
Yeah.
working to
Yeah.
figure out solutions. But yeah.
My last question, do you have or what do you see as your superpower?
I think I don't think I really have a superpower, but if I were to make one up,
Yeah.
it would be probably probably seeing things a little bit before they happen. But again, I don't think I really necessarily have a superpower, but I'd like to develop the one to be able to see things before they come. Seeing around the corner, I think, is, someone going to come and jump you in the night. I'd like to know it's there, right? So, yeah, I think that would be my superpower, is knowing how
Yeah.
to get away from it.
Seeing it before you step around that corner. So,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's where I try to that's what I try to develop, that capacity.
That capacity, that
Yeah,
sense. Oh,
yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah.
So in our first portion here, this is the leadership portion where we get into understanding how you've kind of gotten to where you are, the challenges that you've gone through to getting here, to understand that. So with that in mind, can you tell us a bit about your background, where you're from, where did you grow up, that kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, how much time you got? Challenges? This isn't a 4-hour podcast, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in England,
Yeah.
northeast of London, the capital there, and I grew up with both parents who, raised me the best they can until I was about
Mhm.
7 years old. So that's
Mhm.
not much time in the grand scheme of things, but an impressionable time for sure. And so my parents divorced, and I ended up coming to Canada, immigrating to Canada with my mom and my sisters. My dad stayed back,
Mhm.
and I didn't see him for many, many, many years. It wasn't until I was 18 years old that I had a reacquaintance. So what's that? From 7 to
Yeah.
18,
Yeah.
sort of be seeing your dad or meeting
Yeah.
your dad as
Yeah.
a sort of adult. And that was on my initiative, sort of,
Yeah.
I got to go back to England. I got to have some sort of
11 years. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
reconciliation, but in very impressionable years, right? Like we're
Yeah,
talking,
absolutely.
from a young boy to be, developing to a young man.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of identity issues in that time.
Hmm.
And so I went through that challenge. And then, as a young man raised by a single mother, it comes fraught with all its unique privileges as well
Hmm.
as unique challenges as well. So I went through that. And then I started to find my stride late high school,
Okay.
because high school itself was so chaotic, right? I was still trying to
Hmm.
figure out who I am and who I'm going to hang around with, which crowd I'm going to be a part of. And so it wasn't until I was late high school I hit my stride, and I
Hmm.
decided, okay, yeah, okay, I think I know what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then I started finding myself and started, I pursued a career in aviation, as a matter of fact.
Mm.
And I did that stint
You,
for a
you
while.
became Top Gun.
Well, not military. Civilian aircraft is
Yeah.
is what I used to fly, and I enjoyed that for a season.
Yeah.
And so that was fraught with its own challenges. Certainly in the period of time that I did that as as a man of color, but I did
Mm.
that space, and then I got into faith-based work,
Yeah.
and still involved with that, as
Yeah.
a matter of fact, and have bridged that now into consulting as well. So
Yeah.
that's been the journey. But there's been challenges as a young boy, challenges as a young man, challenges in my early stage of my career, and
Yeah.
challenges of there's a whole book to be written, and challenges in my faith-based work, and that space, and then now in the the sort of self-employed sector,
Hmm.
to complement my faith-based work is where I'm spending a lot of time as well.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, I've known you with your work with relationship counseling, and
yeah.
now this management consulting. I've known you in it, but I don't know a lot of details. But what would really make that change from interestingly, from what you were saying in growing up and then becoming a pilot, I can totally see that, because
Yeah.
how many young men, how many boys, want to fly a plane,
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
in truth, it's got to be very difficult to become a pilot. Um, Even if there is such a thing as autopilot, but to get to that
Yeah.
to get to that point has got to be difficult. So you obviously had to traverse that, and it's interesting that you point out about being a man of color as well at that time. Can you actually fill us in a little bit about that? Because if we're speaking honestly, we're talking about the times right now as well. I mean,
Yeah, you know what? I I entered aviation as a black man when no black men were doing it. It just
yeah.
was not common at all. As a matter of fact, I graduated from a college that had been in existence in Thunder Bay. I graduated from an aviation college out there, and I was the first ever black man to graduate from this particular program, and it was,
Mm.
highly competitive to get in, and even
Mhm.
more competitive to stay in, and then to graduate. So by the time I came out and tried to get a job in aviation, first of all, to get hired was one thing, and then to get hired as a black man, it was just unheard of. Even though at the time I graduated second in my class, I wasn't top gun, I was the second guy. Um, so I graduated second in my class, and yet it was still tough finding a job because racism was still intact in Canada, despite what you see going on in the U.S. I
Mhm.
mean, the racial climate here is just as tense, despite much progress. Don't get me wrong. It was
Mhm.
just as intense, and certainly for me in the 90s when I came out and I was starting aviation. So it was tough landing an aviation job, but I eventually got it.
Mhm. Mhm. And then you made the shift. How did you do that? How did you manage that? I'm hoping you're not going to share that you were pushed out of a plane.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, that's what you did. That's called parachuting. No, I didn't do that. No, for me, if any of your audience is faith-based, they'd understand this term. But I had what at the time felt like this calling, right?
Mhm.
I started off working with youth and just felt this passion for especially young black men whom
Mhm.
I just felt, man, we're so lost, as I was lost,
Mhm.
as I shared without my dad.
Mhm.
And so I just had this passion for them. I befriend them. I would work with them. I would be involved with them with my church in a sort of a volunteer capacity.
Mhm.
And then, it was sort of a natural progression from there. Like, hey, there's just this huge need, and so many men are lost. So many kids
Mhm.
were lost.
Right.
And I just felt, we call it a calling
Right.
to do
Right.
it. And so I answered that call. Maybe it was the
Yeah.
wrong number. I'm not sure. We're still trying to figure out. But I
Yeah.
answered that call
Yeah.
and then start serving as a youth minister at the time, and
Yeah.
left aviation. And I wish I could say I've not looked back, but I have looked back.
Yeah.
But I did leave aviation,
Yeah.
and then in the pastoral capacity, really developed myself in that space. Really
Yeah.
tried to grow. Really tried to learn.
Yeah.
Went on and got a master's in theology. So I really tried to be my best, even though. One could say that, hey, I answered the call and I served, and I'm still have responsibilities
Yeah.
as training and developing young ministers even to this day. But my management consultant is a
Yeah.
space that I'm very happy with in helping people with conflict.
S- and I don't want to make light of this, but obviously, right now, had you stayed in the aviation space as a pilot, it's pretty troubling right now. There's not a whole lot of planes flying around right
Exactly.
now. I mean, Air
Yeah.
Canada has laid off
Oh
how
yes.
many
Yeah. Yeah.
thousands
Yeah.
at this
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
and And so that's it's perhaps to your benefit that you've
Well,
moved into a whole nother world, because talking about conflict, there's no end to that. So
exactly, exactly. Well, I mean, aviation is a very cyclical industry, right? And it's
mm,
so, I get it. There's waves, and so
mm,
I don't have any regret in
hmm
that regard. And yeah, so in having worked in that faith-based field and developing my skills in
yeah,
counseling and relationship, therapy, it's been really great, actually. It's been very rewarding in
yeah,
helping couples, helping families,
yeah,
and then bridging that into helping organizations and companies. It's much of the same
right,
sorts of elements that you're dealing with. It's just on a grander scale.
right. Well, I mean, so this is interesting that you mentioned about this, because you can have a business coach, you can have a fitness coach, you can get just about any of these things, but when it comes to talking about connections between human beings, when it comes to um, you know relationships, when it comes to dealing with conflict, it seems like perhaps people don't want to talk about these issues. It's taboo.
And you know what? Conflict isn't a matter of if, it's when, right? And so
Right,
yeah,
right,
it's one of those sort of things that you don't think about, but it's consequential in every area of life, right? You think
hmm
about relationships. Who of us doesn't have challenges at times communicating with our spouse or with our children or with our coworkers? Or so it's a space that really is limitless
yeah,
in terms of the needs for, like you said, coaching, right? And
yeah,
sometimes we just don't think of it. It's, hey, I'm going to start a business and
yeah,
I'm not going to think about conflict. And
yeah.
no, I'm crashing my business because of conflict, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, this is, this podcast is Leadership to Wealth podcast, and we focus on finances, family, and fitness, because what good is money if you don't have the person to spend it with, right? Or you're continually in conflict with the person that you would normally want to go enjoy that with. It's about having a balance there. And we know the world is full of men that have lots of money, but their family life is drowning. Their family life is horrible. And so, I you can't have, it's got to be the trifecta, is what we really hope to tackle, with health, wealth, and happiness. Get into those things. What good is it if you can't physically, you can't enjoy any of it, or these things, right? And so I think it's important, when we can't just talk about money without talking about relationships, without talking about these difficult subjects.
oh yeah, I mean, you're very wise, Neil, for really, including that in your guiding people, because I tell you, true wealth
Mm-hmm.
is health and relationship health,
Yeah.
right? You got $1 million and no one to share it with.
Right.
It's as if you're broke, right? And
Right.
I've seen so many people that I've worked with who would pay anything
Yeah.
just to have a relationship with one of their children, or
Yeah.
just pay anything to repair their marriage.
Yeah.
Because honestly, with to quote a cliche, right? Teamwork will make that dream work. And when you think about the
Mm.
idea that a couple together, there's so many more opportunities for wealth
Mm-hmm.
and for their dreams.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's shattered, now not only have you got that conflict of the relationship and with the family to deal with,
Mm-hmm.
but you've also got to still build the wealth.
Right.
You've just
Right.
made it exponentially harder for yourself because you've not figured out how to get through conflict
Yeah.
in your home and in your workplace. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can say that when I did go to India, not that long ago, one of the interesting things that would completely challenge our Western society is that
Mm.
there are men and women there that are in complete poverty, but
Yeah.
they are happier than so many people with, two-car garages, SUVs, all of this kind of stuff. They are just happy with life and would love to talk to you, love to share their food with you, and it flies so much in the face of what we see here, that by
Oh,
having money, that is the key.
oh yeah. I mean, you're so right. I mean, I saw you saw that in India. I
Yeah.
had the fortunate I was fortunate enough to my wife and I to go to Russia
Mm.
last year, and we saw some of the same thing. Right, they're facing so much with the the shift out
Hmm.
of the breakup of the Soviet Union and some
Hmm.
of that rebuilding that's taking place, and yet the people are happy because so many of them are happy at home.
Yeah.
And I visited someone's house and I was like, yeah, so so how many bedrooms is this? Thinking from my Western lens,
Yeah.
and they're like, no, this is it. We're all here together.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's the bedroom is the living room, is the,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
they live in humble contexts, and yet they're happy because they keep their relationships tight a lot often.
There is a secret in there when it comes to gratitude. There's a
Yeah,
secret in there that perhaps we can miss on a daily
yeah,
basis in the busyness of life.
yeah, yeah. Huge, huge.
So, all right. So now we're going to move into the our wealth portion, where we get into details of dealing with
Gotcha,
conflict,
gotcha.
and that'll be in the next part.
Okay, guys, that's the end of the first part of the interview. There's a whole lot more still to come in part two, so I want you to join me over there. Now, before you do, please, if you could take a moment to just give us some feedback on the interview, on your thoughts, how you like it. We really appreciate it so much, and we really want to make sure that we continue to improve the product that we provide to you here at Leadership to Wealth. So, if you can do that, don't forget to like and follow, and we'll see you over in part two.
All right. Welcome, Leadership Nation. We are on a journey to bring together men and women who believe in taking ownership and responsibility in their life, and in the areas of finance, family and friends, and fitness. And this is Leadership to Wealth podcast. And I'm your host, Neil D'Souza. So here we are, part two. Our guest is management consultant Andrew Lewis. Andrew, let's talk about issues around conflict. Look, I brought you on the show because, I don't know what I don't know, but I want to start a conversation not so much about conflict, but rather about engaging the issues. What do we avoid? What do we need to know? How do we grow? Let's take it away. Help me out here.
Yeah, well, yeah, again, thanks, Neil, for having me on. I think this is just such an important conversation right now. We cannot avoid conflict, right? You turn
Mm-hmm.
on the TV, it's there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we've got sort of racial overtones that are dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
And every organization, every company is having to figure this out, how to bridge the gap on the subject of race. And so that's sort of what we call a macro conflict. And then you've got sort of those micro conflicts relational, right?
Right.
And so I think one of the biggest things that we're learning now is opening up the conversation to talk about it. The conflicts were there. It's just whether or not we were honest enough to shine a light on it and start speaking. And so I think one of the most important things to understand about conflict is it is there whether we like it or not. It's can we be conflict competent? Meaning, do we know how to deal with it when we uncover it? So it's there. Are we able to deal with it in a short amount of time and
Mm-hmm.
with the least amount of pain, or
Mm-hmm.
is this going to take a lot of time with a lot of pain? But to think it's not there is not the case at all, as we're seeing.
How do we become aware to them? How do we become
Well, you,
present to them?
yeah, there's an old adage that I take from aviation, and it's all about keeping your mentality on the ready. And so it's this whole idea that when everything's going right, there's something going wrong. And I
Hmm.
know that sounds so sadistic and pessimistic, but it keeps you in that state of readiness when you're flying that plane, right? So you're ready to tackle emergencies. You got a lot of responsibility with those passengers. And
Hmm.
so I think by understanding that, hey, there could be something latent under the surface, it allows us to always maintain a posture that we're open, right? We're open
Hmm.
to our spouse, uh, something going wrong, and being taking that posture, or with our children or our business partners, saying, hey, are we good? Is there anything that we need to talk about? Always being open to that. Because honestly, I think so much of what we find in this space, what makes it hard to deal with it, Neil, is that there's this shock. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she thinks this.
Hmm.
I can't believe this was going on. Whereas if we took the posture, hey, how are you doing? How are we doing?
Hmm.
Really interpersonal. How is it going in the company, or how is it going in the organization? And that open-ended question, and wanting to know the answer to that, really,
Hmm.
like, some I work with a
Hmm.
lot of CEOs, and you know they're famous for surveying their organizations, but they don't want anybody to answer
Well,
the truth.
okay, okay. I was thinking this. Okay, please shed some light on this.
Yeah, but they don't want anyone to actually answer honestly. And
Yeah,
when they do, they're like, "Oh my gosh, how could you be saying this?" And
yeah.
yet, in reality, that's what leads to health. Is you're constantly surveying and listening and being open, and then you're working on all of those micro pieces that lead to health. I just think it's got lot healthier. I've been married 28 years,
Yeah.
and I honestly, I've taken that posture. How are we doing?
Mm.
And I don't see it as being negative. I see it as me finding things out early enough to be able to do something about it. Nothing worse for. Can you imagine as a husband or a father, and finding out 5 years, 10 years down the line,
Mm.
something that you would have actually changed or done differently had you known?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, there's nothing worse than regret, right? So I think relationships, conflict, so much of it is about a posture and being able to ask the question, how are we really doing, and wanting to know the answer.
Okay, so I want to ask so first of all, asking the question of how are we doing obviously deals with a relationship, but there's the old adage of let sleeping dogs lie. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure I'm not alone, and sometimes you
Oh,
just think, I'm just going to leave that one alone. But what I'm wondering is, in the question of how are we doing, sometimes revolving around something where you're, how are we doing? How are we doing? You're almost waiting for the point where, oh, okay, you have to manufacture something to just to be able to answer the question. Because if you start spinning it too often, now you're just creating, you're looking for a problem when where there may not be a problem. I don't know. Does this
well,
resonate?
yeah, no, it does, and I get it, and I'm not even suggesting that we're going to be able to, run around in our relationships and fix everything all the time. But I do think the attitude of continuous improvement is one where there's always room to get better. If we take that approach, now we're not necessarily looking at that sleeping dog so much as a
Mm,
problem, but an opportunity. And I think that's what I see
yeah.
in companies that really do well in this space,
Hmm.
and take my consulting recommendations, and even in relationships where I counsel them and
Hmm.
they work on them. So it's sometimes you might spend, in terms of an interpersonal relationship, you might spend
Hmm.
a couple years figuring out how we communicate. But
Hmm.
there's a tons of growth in that. There's
Yeah.
so many different avenues of growth in that lead to so many different other places. Your
Hmm.
communication, helps with your finances helps with your intimacy, then
Mm.
doubles back and then starts helping with the kids. And you're like, well, where's the connection there? Well, when dad's happy, he's going to be more engaged with the kids. When he's more engaged with the kids, they're going to be happier. And so we just, by leaving the sleeping dog,
Mhm.
the oftentimes we're missing out on a lot of opportunities,
Mm. Well,
you know.
I'm gonna try to focus this in on the relationship and business part for right now.
Yeah,
I I want to come back to the society part later. It's
yeah,
obviously it's very visceral right now.
for
But
sure.
let's come back to that one. So in relationships, in business relationships, actually wanting to get better. Um, are we talking? We're talking about the culture of a business. We're talking about the health between business partners. Am I right in
Yeah.
what you're talking about when it comes to that? What are some of the conflicts that you see when it comes to the business side that just to be aware of the things that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, well, oftentimes, a lot of the times on the business side, I'm seeing that there's these process conflicts. So they're they have a structure or way of running, let's say their HR, and or even if it's a startup and there's no HR department,
Mm-hmm.
they have a way of dealing with their clients, and but their process is sometimes flawed. Sometimes they're uh, not giving enough thought to how do they want this thing to flow. If you think about a movie, of course, there's a lot of different scenes and a lot of different action and a lot of different things that are taking place in that movie. It might be going, from one period to another period, but you see that for them to have made that movie, they had to know where they were going.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times in organizations, they don't have a process that's unfolding. And so the conflicts aren't even as much interpersonal. There's just no role clarity sometimes. Like
Mm.
who's doing
Who's
what?
doing what?
That's not is it the first person who picks up the call? Is it the person who's in charge of that department? Is the person who's best with that skill set? Like who's doing what
Mm-hmm.
and why? And the organizations that I've seen do the best with this eliminate as many of those process conflicts as they can so that it's very clear, painfully clear, uh, who's doing what, how's it functioning,
Right.
so it doesn't leave any room for, because those interpersonal ones are going to come anyway.
Right.
And, and so what we want to avoid is the process conflict compounding the interpersonal, right? Because Andrew might
Mm-hmm.
be having a bad day, Neil might be having a bad day.
Mm-hmm.
That's interpersonal.
Mm-hmm.
But if I got a process that's confusing, as to we don't know who we report to,
Mm-hmm.
if we don't know who's making those calls, then we're not necessarily going to be.
So we're talking about the old adage of, you've got a couple of business partners and maybe they've got an assistant or something, but one of the business partners is doing the vast majority of the work, and the other one might be bringing in the clients or stuff like that. But the one partner looks at it and says, "Hey, why am I doing all this work? All you do is go out there and, have drinks with clients, right? While I'm doing all this stuff."
Exactly, and honestly, you've actually hit on something that I see and I deal with a lot, and actually mediate.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that's a skill that I bring to this space is my mediation skills, and that's exactly what I end up dealing with. Is that you often you got a partnership, you've got one guy that might be the outgoing, gregarious
Yeah.
person, client-facing individual, and then you got a guy meanwhile, back at the office, slaving away over all the numbers and having
Mm,
to pay all the bills and dealing with all that. And there's a breakdown because one person feels like they're doing way more work
mm,
than the other end. It's like, hang on, is this supposed to be a 50-50 partnership? And so,
Mm-hmm.
um, am I giving the guy or girl who is client facing the latitude to make real time decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Or do they got to come back and check? How are we going to decide on our process? What's our process going to look like? Once you got those sorts of things clear, it's going to eliminate a lot in your space together. And I've seen so many good partnerships because someone's got the sort of the intellectual capital,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have the ability to execute. Well, there's nothing wrong with that in a partnership. There's nothing wrong with that unless we don't talk about it.
Right.
And unless
Right.
we don't keep coming back to refining those processes to make sure they're on track. Otherwise, you're going to call me in to help dissolve the business and figure out who gets what, right? That's not
Right.
always a comfortable place to be as a mediator.
It's what's left unsaid that that creates the issues.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Interesting. Okay, so step number one is how are we doing? Step number two is what's our processes look like and how do we define them clearly?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Uh,
and
yeah.
then I think what's going to be, and it's a very simple strategy, is then what is going to be our way of resolving conflict, right? You want to build that into your relationship. A lot of it's hard to distinguish sometimes between relationship conflict in terms of interpersonal space and business. But
Mm-hmm.
honestly, if you have a clear way in which we deal with conflict around here, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's in your marriage or in the workplace, you're going to be a lot more successful in because again, you're planning. It's going to happen, not if it's going to happen. And so what happens is you've designed a process for which you're going to deal with conflict. We agree that we're going to sit down and we're going to use this bylaw, this manual, this way, this process of managing conflict. A lot of people go into business and don't do that. They
Right.
don't even have a built-in conflict resolution mechanism for dealing with their
Yeah.
stuff. That's gonna happen. You know it's gonna happen. I know it's gonna happen. We pretend it's not gonna happen, and we've not built anything in.
He just described the honeymoon stage of a new
Yeah,
couple, right?
exactly,
They go
exactly.
in, no one thinks, we're never going to fight, we're never going to have a problem. And that makes sense that business partners would even
Yeah.
go in that way.
Yeah, it's almost like, you know, as a matter of fact, in relationships, I never used to be a big believer in prenuptial agreements.
Uh-oh.
Because yeah, I never used to be a big believer in that. Um, and I still am not when you're a young couple starting out and
Right.
you're both coming out of college or whatever the case may be.
Hmm.
That's safe. But if you've come out of a relationship and you've been married before, or you have adult kids, then I think some sort of contractual arrangement for how we're going to deal with those adult kids is a must. So you may never have to trigger that mechanism, but you have something like that. Well, I think very similar in getting into a business partnership or someone who's in a company space. What's our way of managing the conflict that might happen? And
Hmm.
these are, you see these legal arrangements all the time, but I think before you get to legal, you got to have a mechanism for talking about it because that's what's going to help you to be conflict competent, which I brought up earlier.
Hmm. Well, that's actually very powerful to me because I can speak to there are partnerships that I've avoided just because I- I'm not sure about how we would deal in that space. How would you deal with the conflict? And because one of the things that you understand in business is you can get in to business with someone. It's not nearly as easy getting out, and so there's you almost prefer to stay on your own rather than partner up. But
Yeah.
but with partnerships, there's a lot of benefits that come with it too. And so there's a way to get through that. And so have you actually helped with people in dealing with that when they're getting into a partnership, or do you normally get the call after there's
Yeah,
after
unfortunately,
there's a bit of smoke and fire?
well, thankfully they might listen to your podcast and do it before. I think that's the better way to do it,
Yeah.
because it's not only you're not just structuring the legal agreement, you're
Yeah.
structuring one
Right.
step before that. How do we talk about things when they go down? Nobody builds
Right.
that in. No, literally, they just think of, we're not going to have any conflict. And then they're like, okay, well, how do we continuously prove? Well, we can't continuously prove because we've got no mechanism to deal with the conflict that's in house. Or we just hope it's not there, and so we go straight to the legal and we dissolve the business, and we try to
Mhm.
fracture it that way. What I'm suggesting is you build in a conflict resolution process before it brings you to legal. And that piece is where, unfortunately, I get called in after the fact to help them
Right.
develop one of those.
Right.
But if you build one of those in beforehand, you're basically saying, listen, we are gonna have conflict.
Yeah.
Okay? When everything's going right, something could be going wrong. So we're gonna have conflict. When we have conflict, here's how we're gonna talk about it. This is our process for running the business. Check. That's over here.
Yeah.
Here's our process for when things aren't going right. And I mean, think about again, I borrowed a lot of the principles from aviation and brought them into my conflict resolution space, and that's, you have a checklist,
Hmm.
right? You have an engine fire. That's not random.
Hmm.
If they have an engine fire or if electrical problem, there's very little left to chance. There's a very scripted checklist. Here's what we do when you have an engine fire.
Hmm.
Because physiologically, psychologically, we're not thinking our best, right? We're at 30,000 feet, something's gone wrong. What do? You might turn on a couple of switches and then you reach for the checklist. What does the checklist say at engine fire? Okay, you start isolating the problem, and then you start dealing with it in your co-pilot pilot situation. Again, the metaphor only works so well, but I
Right.
think it has a lot of value in that
Yeah.
a lot of guys don't know how to reach for the checklist. They don't know where to go, and so
Yeah.
they're not conflict competent. They're
Yeah.
they're just hoping for the
Right.
best.
Right. To
But
come circle back around. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So,
So,
so what does that look like? What is, starting with conflict resolution in mind and creating something like that? What does that look like?
well, you're going to take into
I'm
account.
going to try to get you to give away all your secrets. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, then there's no job for me. But no, but it really takes into account some of your personalities. Are you a structured individual who likes a very clear, almost methodical path, or are you a person who wants to do it around dialogue and narrative? And you design it with that in mind, right? So we're gonna have conversations, or sometimes it's as simple as you build in quarterly meetings. And what I often encourage clients to do is they uh, everybody contributes to the quarterly, but I'm talking in stone. This is built into our charter as an organization, and I'm assuming we're talking either a small startup or a business partnership
Yeah.
or thing like that.
Right.
Not necessarily if you've got a complex HR process, sometimes it's very much the same as well. But
Right.
it's built into our charter. This is how we each contribute to that quarterly meeting or monthly meeting, and here's the things we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's spelled out on every single agenda. Every single agenda has a standing agenda. We talk about um, our interpersonal relationship. We talk about the money, right? Because something funny about money. We talk about the money. It comes up every month. And what's really cool about that, Neil, is that uh, people aren't having to take worries home. because they know in my monthly pre-scripted agenda, we always talk about the money.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is, it does two things. One, it tells me I don't have to worry about it because it's coming up in the monthly meeting that we've already pre-scripted in our charter, in
Mm-hmm.
our conflict res, our CR agreement. Or, if I don't have to bring it home, or I don't have to have the courage to bring it up. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to bring it home and you don't have to bring it up because it's already there for you. It's my checklist.
Mm-hmm.
It's in play, it's ready to go. And so I help them design those checklists, charters. I help them design it, those conflict resolution charters. I did design it with their dynamic in mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you've got a gregarious, outgoing, customer-facing individual, inside person. So we might always talk about that split. That
Mm-hmm.
might be something on the agenda. Money's always on the agenda. Um, uh, so you leave room for that.
Yeah.
Vacation times on the agenda. Um, Long-term planning might be on the agenda.
Mm.
And again, monthly's probably is probably a reasonable amount of time for smaller companies. But again, there's 3 weeks. They don't have to worry about anything. I know it's on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to have the courage to bring it up. I know it's already on the agenda. It's on our checklist.
Yeah.
And it's important, I think, that's conflict competence. We
Right.
know it's going to happen, but we're ready in advance.
Wow. I mean, what you just shared there, talking about the money, standing agenda, talk about the money, talk about our interpersonal relationships, and talking about long-term planning. Just even those three, you, although we were just talking about them for the business, that could easily be applied to your relationship.
Oh,
Like
huge,
like
huge.
I'm just thinking of my own relationship, and hey, if my wife knew that we were going to talk about money every month, if she knew we were going to talk about whatever the issues are, uh, they're not going to blindside me somewhere in between. She knows, okay, I can talk about it then, and then long term planning, bring up whatever it is. I can't say that it's sexy, because who wants to have a board meeting with your wife every month? Um, but it doesn't. It definitely sounds like being conflict competent.
Well,
And seeing
listen.
around the corner, which is what you started off with,
Well,
right?
I tell you,
You led with that.
it even goes farther than that. I
Okay.
remember growing up when and my mother, God bless her, she's 86 years old. She's an amazing woman. I love her, love her. But when I was younger, I would feel like my mom, because I was raised by a single mom, so she was
Yeah.
playing mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
I would feel like she'd be nagging me, like and no woman wants to be called a nag, but I would just feel like, man, she's on my case. So I
Mm-hmm.
sit down to play my then version of video games, right, which might have been Nintendo or some archaic thing like that. Hey, come and sweep the floor. Oh, and then I'd sit down again and I would do my version of playing with whatever. Oh, hey, here, come and pick up this. And so you're constantly being called away, and then I'm like going to bed at night, hearing my mom's voice in my head, and I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? So I think I've always made it my goal, even as a parent,
Mm.
relationally, give them clarity when they're sitting and playing,
Wow.
or doing whatever they're doing. They should be able to enjoy that space without feeling like they're doing something wrong or
Right.
being or guilty. So again, it's a standing agenda here on the fridge. This is what we're going to talk about on Monday night. Kids, you need more than a month. You can't go a month. You need weekly for sure. Here's what we're going to talk about. Every Monday, we're going to talk about these things and these three things. It sits right there on the fridge. And then, hey, go knock yourself out. You're allowed to do whatever. But I'm going to bring it up on Monday again. How's this going? And again, the younger the kid, the shorter that time span. But
Right.
certainly, I found that very helpful for teenagers because their hormones are changing, they're developing their own identity, whatever the case. So you'd be on their case every single day, except that
Mm.
you clearly say, here's what we're going to address every Monday. And then it gives them something to work towards in that week.
Mm.
and it's really healthy. And I think the other thing that I would say, Neil, is that um, the only thing that can derail something like this is if the business partner or the spouse is just flat out lying.
Right.
And I bring that up intentionally because I think uh, that should not necessarily be taken out of the equation, um,
Mhm.
because we're all human beings, right? And sometimes because of the shame culture that we live in, it's sometimes difficult to be truthful, right? But the checklist helps you, because I know I'm going to have to talk about this at my monthly meeting, and it's right there. I'm less likely to steal from my business partner. You know what I mean? Because the
Mhm.
conversation around what we spent
It's gonna
is
happen.
coming
Yeah.
up on the 21st of the month, right? I know it's coming up, so it's a lot. It sort of helps me with my temptation to lie because I've got built in to my checklist us
Mhm.
addressing this thing versus we never talk about it till the annual board meeting. Now I've got 11 and a half months
Right.
to make
Right.
up a narrative, right? And that leads to a lot less accountability uh, built into our dynamics. So I
Right.
think this idea of planning to have conflict and structuring how you're going to deal with conflict is just so important.
Right. Right. It's a preeminent strike.
Yeah,
Get in there early,
yeah,
before
absolutely.
the forces build up, before the empire is at your door with the entire armada.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I
But
mean, you think about how many couples, man. I mean,
yeah.
they can deal with one problem. They
Hmm.
just can't deal with 101 at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I want to just quickly go back to you were mentioning about parenting.
Yeah.
You talked about weekly. What are some of the things that you would advise or people should put on their radar to talk about weekly with their kids?
Well, I'm a big believer in, you're talking about wealth, and I'm a big believer in you're only as happy as your unhappiest child.
Okay.
And I think you're, especially, I mean, I'm not to say men are, impervious to this, but especially for women. And so you just can't be happy. um, you can't be happy being completely wealthy and your kids being poor in spirit or poor in confidence.
Hmm.
So it's that whole idea, right? You have money but no one to share it with. So I
Yeah.
think it, every Monday, or that's what we would
Yeah.
do, in the weekly, checking in on their confidence, checking in on their confidence, making sure that's not dipping. There's a lot of things attacking their esteem. And I'm not talking about, trying to give them artificial confidence, but checking in. How are they doing? Are they completing enough things in their life to feel good about themselves, right? You're not artificially giving them
Mm.
steroid confidence. That's not going to help them. But you're helping them succeed at some of their goals and their initiatives so that they're actually building confidence because that's
Mm.
that's where confidence comes from, right? It's looking at the past and saying, look how far I've come, right? And
Right.
if you're not, you don't get confidence by sitting on the couch
Hmm.
and then artificially telling them that they're great. It's you get
Hmm.
them moving, and you tell them that they're great by how far they've come. So I think
Hmm.
you constantly checking on their confidence is just an important relationship tip. And again, where does that come from? It comes back from this idea that, listen, if my kids aren't happy, I'm not talking glee. I'm just talking
Yeah.
if they're not secure,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to be able to
Yeah.
have true wealth in my life. So,
Yeah.
and often that's where it breaks down, right? The relationship with the parents and their kids.
Mm.
Because out of that lack of self-esteem, so many other crises
Yeah.
come, right?
Wow.
So checking in on that is huge.
Wow. That's very powerful because with my kids, they're all in that stage. And
Yeah.
it's powerful to think about checking in with their confidence because um, it's absolutely an issue. It's
Yeah.
absolutely something that we've identified and actively try to work on. But is there a benefit to doing that in the if they've got other siblings? Is there a benefit to doing it with all of them or keeping it separate in that setting specifically for parenting?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's it's one of those. I'm a firm believer in it's got to be separate. It's got to be
Okay.
separate. Yet there's a lot you can do as a choir, so to
Yeah.
speak. And and there's that benefit to the village,
Yeah.
because our culture is so big on shame.
Yeah.
um, that individual check-in in keeping our arms
Mm.
around them, our kids, is so important. Is so that individual, and honestly, I think that's the mistake that we made. I know for me, when we were raising our kids, I got adult kids now, but when we were raising them, we blended our families to support in-laws and that sort of thing. And I tried, because there were so many of us, I tried to move everybody as a clan, as a tribe.
Mm.
And there's times now in having conversations with my son, who he's revealed to me that there was things that were missed,
Mm.
just because my attempt to treat everybody together, everybody fair, move everybody as a tribe, move everybody as a clan, as opposed to trying to get that individual time to listen, is sometimes that we can make that mistake. And it leads to other conflicts, right? Other conflicts in the home, and sometimes they're not obvious, right? The kids are acting out for attention.
Right.
Uh, so
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
That is a whole lot of gold right there. I mean, we could have gone on any one of those topics and just stuck on that. We'll have to come get you back on and do that. But I do want
yeah,
to kind of circle back and just quickly there's a lot to unpack. So I don't want to get into this society thing too deeply because it we could do a podcast on this alone. But when it comes to talking about conflict as it relates to our society, it's relevant today.
yeah,
It's relevant
huge,
right now.
huge,
And uh, people are in all different places. There are people who can't understand why it's happening.
yeah,
Um, some people believe that it's always existed. Some people have seen change. Some people don't believe that it'll ever change.
yeah, yeah,
And so there's these terms that are being thrown out there that we're trying to even understand. Allyship, and you know, I think one of the most challenging things when we get into this and talking about conflict in society is we don't even know where to begin the conversation.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's tough. Everybody who, all those things you described, everybody's right. It's just the question to what degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a multifaceted issue, and
Yeah.
I've mediated conflict with citizens and police.
Right.
I've had to go into police units and train them
Right.
how to de-escalate, and it's that's one of the joys of working in this space, is really trying to give back to your community. And
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you it's multifaceted. Anybody whose hearts right now don't go out to the black community, again, which is not a monolith, but if your
Mm-hmm.
hearts don't, there's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody's hearts who don't go out to the police, there's something wrong. Anybody whose heart's not going out to the white community, who's trying to understand these complex terms like white privilege, man, there's something wrong. And I think partly the challenge that I'm seeing is as you said, people are trying to look for these one
Mm-hmm.
single simple solutions. And once you look for a simple solution to a complex problem, you've just made it more complex. Because now you're like, oh, okay, I got it. I got this term. Oh, okay, here's this term. It's called privilege. If we give this term and we give this label, then we're going to solve a whole thing. And now you've just opened up 300 other conversations that have been gone underground, and then another 500 that's come overground. So, whoa! But that term was trying to explain something, and I think whether it's fitting or accurate or best or useful
Mhm.
is always up for debate. Um, but I think the challenge that I see is people have got to be able to talk. And Neil, it's so saddening. Honestly, I think what you're doing on podcasts like this, having guests, having honest conversations, we're not yelling at each other, we're discussing, we're talking. Man, is so what's needed for people. So what's needed because even on social media, the attempt to polarize, the attempt to polarize comes because we get so angry at each other. I remember just using an example the other day to say, let's say you love jazz and I love country, right? If I say that jazz is bad, then all of a sudden you've got some things to say about country.
Mhm.
But what happens is it doesn't end there. Now you have to find more jazz friends to support your point of view,
Right.
and I got to find more country friends to support my point of view, and we end up polarizing. So it's
Mhm.
got nothing to do with the music and the authenticity of the sound and all the nuances that go with why you like jazz and I like country. It's I can only feel safe with country because you will not let me
Right.
say what I really believe
Right.
about jazz. So it's got all of these political overtones, and I mean, I'm telling you, if the only thing I would suggest to your audience is don't try to solve complex problems with simple solutions, otherwise you make it
Mm.
worse. Um, and that means not every white person is a racist, and not all police are bad. And just because that doesn't sound angry enough,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean you don't understand the plight of the black community and don't even understand the frustration of the black community, of which I proudly feel like I'm a part of and have
Mhm.
experienced racism. But I understand that if we're going to get allies, as you talked about earlier,
Mhm.
we've got to be able to have that conversation in the messy middle of this,
Yeah.
and not on the extremes, right?
Yeah.
Not that jazz people are completely bad
Yeah.
and country people are completely radical, but there's unique sounds to the music in the middle.
Well, this is really interesting because I had a really good conversation around this, not just this past week, just this weekend. And one of the topics was there are those that are trying to help bridge the gap,
Yeah.
and there are those that have been suppressed
Hmm.
but are distrusting of those. And so even if those that are trying to help are clearing a space, those that distrust don't want to move into that space. And so,
Yeah.
along your analogy of there have been those who have loved country music, yeehaw, for a long, long time, and there are those who have are into jazz, and they've been in different camps, but those who are in country music there may be some that are trying to, hey, look, we can enjoy country music and jazz, but the jazz community might be, I'm not sure if I'm ready because I've seen for a long time that you're just not uh, you're not ready for us to commingle.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so unfortunate. I think it takes courage among those who are in the messy middle, as I like
Yeah.
to call it,
Yeah.
And it takes courage because you're gonna be demonized for not saying all jazz people are bad and all country
Right.
people are bad. You're gonna be demonized for not being on the extreme. You're gonna be demonized by you love jazz. You're gonna be demonized by the jazz people
Mm-hmm.
because you're right. So
Mm-hmm.
those who step into the arena of this have got to be very courageous because you're going to be demonized by both extremes, and you've got to have the courage to believe there is a greater good that will come from it if we continue the conversation. Um, there is a greater good, and you've got to. I think we got to take it out of the political sphere because I think the political sphere is tied to money and is tied to the
Right.
power and is tied to the office, right? So
Right.
I can't speak genuinely if my goal is to. It's harder for me to speak genuinely if my goal is to get reelected.
Right.
But if we were on neutral ground on a podcast or in a non in a space in a healing space
Mm.
or in a safe ground space, then I think we can actually make some progress, and then maybe that can inform our politicians how to
Yeah.
help with policy. But I think they're not going to be the ones that are the ones that solve it because they need the votes in order to
Yeah.
stay in power or get in power, and they can't get the votes without sort of being tethered to the extreme. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that some of these issues can be entirely legislated. I think they got to be conversed about. We
Mm-hmm.
got a dialogue, and I think every generation makes it a little bit better for the next, right? I don't think we're going to solve it all in our generation. I think, but we make it a little better for our kids, and then we make their kids, and hopefully over time,
Yeah.
we get to to where we're enjoying the sounds of both
Yeah.
together, making a melody, right? So
Well, you really mentioned about, or what you were mentioning made me think of, I believe it was the 1936 Olympics when the Australian who came in second, and there's the iconic photograph of the two black runners with their hands
yeah,
up, and he wanted to participate, but they weren't really sure what to do. Now he got this silver medal, and he wore a patch along with the other runners,
hmm,
and he was vilified for it when he went back to Australia, and it's hard to for anyone to say, "Let me sign up for that. Let me
yeah,
sign up to be in that messy middle,"
yeah,
and I'm just trying to help.
yeah,
Don't shoot the messenger. Don't
yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah,
help, but on Leadership to Wealth, it's clear that somebody's got to go in and be willing to take the bullet, so to say. Someone's got to be willing to go step up. And if I'm hearing you right, it really sounds like this needs to be the old saying, "Power to the people."
yeah,
Where people are on the streets in the sense of neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend. We start those dialogues where we can then go together and utilize our voting power to be able to move the legislation, move the system, the systemic issues. And again, I do not want to oversimplify this into that sentence, that framework, but it really does sound like, hey, this is where we've got to get it and move it upwards if we want to.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, and I think in what I love in my conflict work, one of the areas that we drill down on, and I get a lot of my theories from, is the idea of restorative justice, and
Yeah.
it's really built on this concept of every offender at one time was a victim.
Hmm.
So even though I have an offender and I have a victim and I'm trying to reconcile them, I have to keep in mind that that offender is also a human being. Now, I'm sensitive to the fact that the victim's the victim right now, right? It's
Yeah.
hard for me to have compassion on an offender
Yeah.
when I've got a victim. But when we try to build those bridges, that's the framework, that's the lens we use. And out of that doesn't mean there's not consequences to those offenders,
Mm-hmm.
right? We got to still deal with that there, whether that's lawful responsibility or reparation or amendments to what's happened. But it does open up a lot of conversation between the two. And I think the very best hope that we have in this space is when we can have both parties working together. I don't think, I know we're talking many cultures more so than black and white. I get that, but if we can just use the two for a second, because I know we've got native rights, we've got a whole bunch of other things, but in this prevalent conversation now, I don't think we're going to see solutions until you've got shoulder to shoulder the black and the
Mm-hmm.
white together saying the same message. I don't think that the blacks, we can say it louder
Mm-hmm.
and the whites quiet on the whites, and I don't think the whites can say it louder. I think we both got to be saying it with the same voice,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and not polarizing each other for not getting it. I think that's true reconciliation, where we're sharing in the solutions, we're sharing in the message. And honestly, I've been encouraged by some of the conversation I've been hearing. I've been hearing
Mm-hmm.
some really good ideas out of the white community, like some really good ideas out of the white community, and I'm hearing some really good ideas, of course, out of the black community, who are exhausted in many cases, at least as we see in the U.S. context. And I think when those two come together and start sounding those same notes, I think we're going to be able to move the needle. I think we really are, and we're already seeing that. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. Not to completely solve it, but to
Yeah.
certainly move the needle. Maybe your kids will enjoy the fruits
Yeah.
of that. And there's no denying there's been great progress from the
Yeah.
days when I just stepped into aviation and tried to enter that space, and the overt racism thankfully has gone covert in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's one step better, and
Yeah.
then hopefully covert will cease to exist eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, who knows if it ever will, because there's the reality of just being human beings, and
Yeah,
that's just part of our condition. Is
yeah,
we're all messy in some
yeah,
way, shape, or form.
yeah,
Um, there's a lot of gold here. There's a lot of gold nuggets that you dropped. Everything from how are we doing? What's our process look like? What's our way of dealing with conflict? Becoming conflict competent. Um, you know, uh, and even that last statement: every offender was once a victim, and both parties working together. There's a lot to think about on everything you've shared today. Um, but before we go, I just want to ask if people want to engage with you, if they want to ask for your help, if they want to get into conflict resolution, if they want to call you in as a management consultant, and any of these things, what do people do? What's next steps? Where do people go? How do they get a hold of you?
yeah. They can go to my website, conflictsolutions.ca, and set up a consult. If you have an organization where you're
Yeah.
needing some consulting, maybe you want to set up a strategic plan. Maybe you've got a business partnership and you're trying to figure that out, and we can help you in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've got an entire team in our organization that can help you in that space. I am privileged to be the founder, but we've got lots of great people to help. And even in this space, we have relational counselors to
Mm-hmm.
help you with your marriage or mediation. Let's hope it doesn't come to
Right.
divorce, but if we have to dissolve it, then let's make sure we do it right.
Right.
Even that, even conflict resolution is required to dissolve it right. So,
Right.
I'm hoping none of your audience ever need that service, but conflictsolutions.ca, you can get in touch with our team there.
Conflictsolutions.ca. Andrew Lewis, thank you so much. To be honest, there's so much there. There's so much to unpack, and I just really appreciate you helping us wade into some murky waters and giving us thoughts. Again, I started off with saying, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm left realizing there's even more that I don't know. But there's definitely some light there for me to see how starting to look around the corner is far better than waiting till you get around the corner and the bus rolling you over.
Absolutely.
I'm smart enough to know that. So with
Well,
that,
it's been an honor. It's been an honor. Thank you for having
yeah,
me. I've
yeah.
enjoyed the conversation, and again, congratulations on this fantastic initiative. It's so needed, and maybe one day I can be on the other side of this microphone.
It sounds great. Well, Leadership Nation, thank you so much. On behalf of everyone, Andrew, thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.